I am immortal, born 400 years ago in the Highlands of Scotland. I'm not alone. There are others like me, some good, some evil. For centuries I've battled the forces of darkness, with holy ground my only refuge. I cannot die, unless you take my head, and with it, my power. I am Duncan MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod, the Highlander. In the end, there can be only one. I could see the couple now, their bodies entwined, her face turned skyward, his face buried in her breast. I took out the binoculars and adjusted the focus. The man's jaw was clenched, his eyes tightly shut. The woman stared, amazed, her mouth caught wide in a cry. In another context, it might have been a scream of ecstasy. The weather that day was hot, sweltering, uncomfortable. Not a typical July morning in Seacouver. I took a cooling swig from my bottle of water. The police had taped off the area with an efficiency I recognized from previous encounters with Seacouver flatfoots. The cops must have seen us on our rooftop perch, but that didn't seem to bother them. Maybe there were too many people watching. Workers had emerged from the comfort of their air-conditioned offices so they could see what was happening. A coachload of Finnish tourists had poured onto the sidewalk, camera phones extended. Buzzing television news choppers supplied vicarious thrills. Me and Antoine, we were just another pair of ghouls. Ghouls with a good view. We'd fooled our way past an elderly doorman and found ourselves on the roof of an adjacent brownstone. A pigeon landed on top of an air vent and gazed at me curiously, so I returned to the binoculars. I scanned both corpses, searching for clues. The bodies had been blackened by the extreme heat. It also looked like their viscous membranes, eyes, lips, had been burnt clean away. The pair laid naked, their clothes incinerated by the force of the flames. His hair had gone completely. What remained of her blonde locks was singed and matted to her exposed skull. A hazel brown cut across my view and I lowered the binoculars. The detective had emerged from behind a tree, clutching a length of silver that glinted in the harsh sunlight. "Highlander," said a voice at my side. I was impressed with Antoine's eyesight. 16th century German, I said, lifting the binoculars back to my eyes. "That's a fine blade." "What about the guy's sword?" Antoine asked. "Can you see?" "Not from this angle." No, wait. I can see the hill. Over there, beside that bush. Looks Roman to me. Antoine nodded. "Ah, thought as much. A gladius?" I lowered the binoculars. "I can't tell. Not from this distance. Be good to look at those bodies close up. If it's okay with you, I'll get Lauren on the case." I turned to go, but Antoine placed a tentative hand on my arm. Duncan, don't you think we're being a little premature? These guys might just get up and walk away. It's not like their heads have been removed." "This is different," I told him. I headed for the fire escape. The snarled traffic meant we had a long time to wonder why this was different. We sat in silence. I nudged the Porsche back downtown. Immortals didn't die, not like this. You cut an immortal, they got up. You shot them, they got up. You burnt them, they got up. They always got up. The only way to stop us is to lop off our heads, let our life force flood out. It isn't what you call a subtle occurrence. Lightning arcs, electrical items go crazy. It's quite an event. We call it the quickening. The life force of the defeated individual is taken by the victor of the battle. So even when we properly die, immortals last forever. But as a trapped soul, vying for space with all the other trapped souls trying in vain to get out again. But this was different. These two, this man and this woman, they weren't decapitated, but they had been destroyed. That much I knew for certain. We can sense when another immortal is close by, but these two, whatever they were, their essence, their soul, had gone forever. I stole a glance at Antoine. He was just sitting and staring into the shimmering heat, preoccupied. Wasn't like him at all. Antoine Genet was just a kid of 22 when he experienced his first death. And here he was over 300 years later. He told me he was trying to get away from all this, that he wanted a quiet life, a normal life. I tried to tell him that's impossible for people in our position. I tried it myself for a while, fell in love, ran a business. But in the end, you couldn't escape the game. He'd rung me as soon as the TV pictures started coming in, and I came to the shop and watched the images with him in silent shock. Then without a word, we both got into the Porsche and headed uptown. Antoine was born in Paris, 1696, to good, aristocratic parents. He told me he used to hang out with Voltaire and Rousseau and all their friends. Antoine even claimed to have died in a street brawl protecting Voltaire from a bunch of heavies who disagreed with something the philosopher had said. Antoine couldn't remember what, but that was like him. At first, I couldn't imagine the normally exuberant young man in the passenger seat mixing it up with Enlightenment's greatest figures. But now I believed the bit about the street brawl. We were edging our way through the uptown traffic, and I reached over and turned on the radio as a way of filling the silence.
Johnny, I have to say to you without a shadow of an exaggeration that this has been an extraordinary day in Seacouver.
A man in the news chopper crackled.
As we speak, the authorities seem to be extending their cordon. They're taking no chances.
But for those people only joining us now, can you remind us of the situation uptown?
Sure, Johnny. At around 10:30 local time, we started getting reports of a man and woman sword fighting on Fulbright Avenue.
Just to confirm, but that's sword fighting?
That's right, Johnny. Except they weren't fighting as such.
You'll need to explain that one, bud.
Sure, Johnny. They were they were about to fight. It was like they were sizing one another up.
And when they did engage in combat, what happened then? What happened then? I switched off the radio and recalled the television images. The man and the woman seen from above in a grainy aerial shot. They made their way down Fulbright like a couple of tigers stalking one another. And all the while, an overexcited newscaster gabbled in the corner of the screen. The woman, well, she was tall, blonde, Scandinavian-looking, dressed in leather. The guy was squat, Caucasian, well-built, a businessman. After what seemed like an eon, and believe me, I know what an eon feels like, the two of them locked in battle. She went to strike and he went to parry. And then, in an instant, there was this tremendous flash of white light. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. The two figures were consumed, writhing in agony, burning before our eyes. We watched, Anton and myself. Everyone else in Seacouver, and for all I know, around the globe. We watched as the man and the woman twisted and turned in the depths of fire before their charred corpses collapsed to the ground. Their bodies lay there, still smoking, while the news choppers hovered above them, and the anchor woman burbled incomprehensibly back in the studio. I was suddenly aware of smoke. Antoine had lit a cigarette. Lung cancer is not a concern for people whose bodies constantly mend themselves, but it's damned annoying nonetheless. "Do you mind?" I said, gesturing at the upholstery. "This car's my cousin's. It's a classic." Antoine shrugged, and for the first time since we saw the bodies, gave me that familiar grin. He flicked the cigarette out of the window. It always felt weird crossing over the threshold. This place held so many memories. The shop that Tessa and I bought together all those years ago. The shop I sold when she wasn't around any longer. That's how I got to know Antoine. He rang me up out of the blue, said he'd bought the shop, that he didn't know the first thing about antiques, and that he needed my help. Of course, over the phone, I couldn't sense that he was immortal, but sometimes you just trust your gut. But it wasn't a trap I was walking into, not this time. Like a lot of immortals, Antoine had gotten tired of the game, the ongoing battle to decide who is the one, the ultimate immortal. I guess even 22-year-olds get tired eventually. But whatever. All he wanted was a normal life. Why the shop, though? Why my shop? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so maybe it was that. Maybe he just wanted to belong somewhere. Antoine had watched his family wither and crumble away while he stayed the same. At least he'd inherited the family loot. Maybe he saw me as some sort of replacement, some sort of role model, a father figure. Who knows? Maybe I just wanted him to see me as that. One thing was for sure. Antoine was right. He needed help. Putting it politely, business wasn't his forte. The first thing I did was call out one of my contacts in the antiques market. He had a daughter, Lauren, who I knew would make a good assistant. She was 25, mortal, with enough business sense to pretty much run the place for him. It also meant I had someone on site that could do me the occasional favor, even if that favor was a little out of the ordinary. I told Lauren to call up my old friend Lenny at the morgue so he could pull some strings and arrange for me to see the bodies. Not a usual task for an antiques assistant, I grant you, but Lauren was game. It was also obvious to anyone with eyes that she was sweet on Antoine. Well, anyone other than Antoine, that is. In other circumstances, the two of them would probably have ended up walking down the aisle together, probably having a brood of beautiful children. But these weren't ordinary circumstances. I kept trying to tell Antoine there is no normal life, not for us. There are no happy endings for immortals, no picket fences and diapers and ball games. We can't have children. Immortality renders us all, man and woman alike, infertile. Lauren made a note of Lenny's number at the morgue. Then she thrust the letter opener pointedly in the direction of the porcelain section. As I approached, I watched the figure on the CCTV. I was aware of a familiar sensation, like a series of sparks racing through my veins. An immortal was here. I clenched and unclenched my hands as I got closer. "Can I help you?" I said to the back of the figure. The woman turned her face toward me, as blanched as the vase she was examining. I relaxed. If she'd come to fight us, she wasn't very well prepared. She certainly didn't have a sword.
This is a Wellington Blue, isn't it? I didn't think any of these still existed.
"You're an expert?" Antoine had appeared behind me. Unlike me, he didn't seem suspicious. In fact, the woman seemed to have restored his characteristic bonhomie. She smiled. Yes, she was beautiful, but those eyes were full of pain.
Never understood why anyone collects these things. Why would you risk owning something so fragile?
"Some people like fragile things," I said, gently taking the vase from her and returning it to its stand. "Can we help you?" The woman fixed me with an arrogant stare.
You're the owner of this establishment?
Used to be, years back. My friend here owns it now. I'm his advisor.
Good. Then I think you can help me, Mr. MacLeod. Someone is trying to kill me.
We ended up at Mitch's place, a couple of blocks over east. It was an Irish-themed restaurant, authentically old country, or so Mitch would like to think. Little did Mitch know I'd spent the early 1700s traveling the Emerald Isle, and that in my opinion, inflatable shamrocks don't really capture the essence of the place. But the Guinness was good, and that's what Antoine supped as we got to know our new acquaintance. Her name was Maria Rostov, and she was 223 years old. Most immortals are attuned to the era in which they find themselves, but Maria was different. It was as though she'd stepped straight out of St. Petersburg around 1820. I had expected her to coquettishly fan herself with Mitch's burger menu. Antoine seemed to have forgotten all about the two immortals he watched burn that morning. He gazed at Maria like a puppy dog. But then, that was his curse, to be forever 22. Maria was hardly what you call talkative. We managed to glean some limited biographical information from her, but that was about it. Maybe her curse was shyness. "You know," I said with a grin, "someone's trying to kill me too." "And me?" added Antoine with another grin. In fact, that's kind of what being an immortal means. Maria gazed at me levelly.
Mr. MacLeod, I understand you once tried to reject the game.
Yes. Well, that wasn't such an easy thing to do, believe me.
We immortals have a right to our lives, Mr. MacLeod. Or do you now feel we should just give in to our baser instincts?
Antoine couldn't help himself. definitely give in to our better instincts? He smirked in a way he clearly thought was endearing, but she didn't respond. Beneath the table, I ground his boot under my heel. Over the years, I've learned that the game, Miss Rostov, is more complex than any of us might have suspected.
The game is barbaric.
The force of her words took both Antoine and myself by surprise. We exchanged glances. Many immortals believe the game to be honorable, if it's played by the rules, of course.
What's honorable about death, Mr. MacLeod?
She gazed at me impenetrably. Look, Miss Rostov, I'm not sure we're the people to help you. I mean, who exactly do you want protection from?
Gentlemen, I am a woman of high birth. The Rostovs were an important, influential family in Moscow in the 1820s. My father was a clergyman and owned a great deal of land. We were rich, and we were respected. As was the custom at the time, it was arranged that I should marry a man of equally high birth, enabling the joining together of two powerful families. The man in question was undoubtedly a handsome individual, destined to inherit a fortune. But Dmitri was not a good man. He was given to vodka and its brutal excesses. To cement the marriage, it was expected I should bear Dmitri a child. We tried and tried, but I could not give him the heir he so desperately needed to prove he was a man. The family physician was a religious man as well as a man of medicine. Dr. Balok examined me repeatedly, but declared he could find no reason as to my infertility, either spiritual or physical.
Mm-hmm. It's because no immortal can bear children. Maria cast her eyes downward.
Dmitri was a strong man. Night after night, he forced himself upon me, as though his aggression could somehow force a life into being.
I went to put out a reassuring hand, but she seemed so brittle, I couldn't quite bring myself to do it. You don't have to tell us any of this.
Dmitri was a bear of a man, but his heart was like any other mortal's. One night, when he grabbed me from behind, I was ready for him. I plunged a pair of scissors into his chest, again and again. I watched him fall back, his chest oozing blood, his face contorted in surprise. I watched him crash to the bedroom floor like a great tree. He flailed for a long time, and eventually the flailing became little more than a sporadic twitch, and then nothing.
I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry.
I'm not sorry. He was a monster. But I was worse. I was a murderer.
What did you do?
In the early hours of the 13th of December, 1823, I climbed to the top of my father's house and threw myself from the roof. They found my broken body in the snow the following morning, and I survived until midday. Neither my father nor mother came to see me in my death throes.
She finally looked up.
Not a very honorable death, I'm afraid.
But then you came back from the dead.
I had dishonored my family in every way imaginable. I had killed a man, and then, the ultimate sin, I had taken my own life. And the minister's daughter, too. I cannot blame my family for turning their back on me in death. I woke on a slab amidst the corpses of peasants who died of cold and hunger. Not a fitting end for somebody of my rank. But I wasn't alone. Dr. Belloc was there in the morgue. He helped me through those early, torturous moments of rebirth.
He helped you? He wasn't shocked when you popped up from the slab?
Oh, he was. But Dr. Belloc, Frederick, was a unique man, a visionary. I was an unnatural thing, a monster risen from the dead. Not just that, I was unstable, unhinged from the trauma of what I had done. But he wasn't horrified. No, Frederick was fascinated in me and what I could mean for his work. He smuggled me from the morgue and hid me, took me to his dacha in St. Petersburg, far away from everyone I'd ever known.
What you could mean for his work? What did he want from you?
Well, Frederick's wife had died from a terrible wasting disease years earlier, but not before she had given him a daughter, a beautiful green-eyed creature with flaxen hair.
So he wanted you to be mother to his daughter?
More than that, Mr. MacLeod. He wanted me to save his daughter.
Oh, sorry, I don't understand.
Frederick's daughter was only 15, but she was exhibiting the same symptoms as her mother.
It's terrible, but I really don't see how...
Frederick was a biologist, a brilliant man. He thought he could best understand God's creations by seeing inside them.
Dissection?
Frederick had watched me rise from the grave and believed me to have been saved for God's divine purpose. He thought if he could understand my immortality, that he could save his daughter's life.
He cut you open.
He was trying to save his daughter, Mr. MacLeod.
And did it work?
Of course not. He was a clever man, a man of science and religion, but he was not clever enough. His daughter died the same way her mother did. Frederick himself died of grief some 5 years later. But not before he swore revenge on me.
The people trying to kill you?
Belloc's assassins. Mortal men and women sworn to rid the world of... well, what would you call me? When Belloc found me, he called me his daughter's savior. By the end, he said I was little more than a she-devil. You had best answer your telephone, Mr. MacLeod.
As I took Lauren's call, I watched Maria Rostov and Antoine Genet exchange pensive smiles. Trust me on this. A morgue is the last place you want to spend a hot summer's day. It'd be bad enough if the corpses under inspection had died even in a half-respectable fashion. If their heads had been removed, for instance. The charred, twisted bodies before me were about as mangled as you could imagine, but I wasn't so bothered by their appearance. The amount of killing I've seen over the years has given me a pretty strong constitution. The humidity, though, even with the air conditioning at full whack, made the stench rising from the cadavers virtually overwhelming, like raw meat left to fester for weeks. Lanny was his usual cheery self, apparently unfazed by the stench. I guess you don't survive half a century as a mortician if you can't put up with the occasional bad smell, let alone the endless parade of death that passes through a morgue. I knew Lenny from way back when, but I seem to know everybody from way back when. In fact, I knew his grandfather and his great-grandfather. All of them have been morticians. Funny choice for a family business, but who am I to judge? I trusted Lenny as much as I ever trusted any mortal. Well, with maybe one or two exceptions. Ever seen anything like this? I asked him. Said Lenny, and shook his wizened head. Not in 50 years of dealing with, your people. How can they be dead if they haven't been decapitated? Lenny shrugged. Beats me, Duncan. If these guys are gonna get up again, they sure taking their time about it. I'll give them that. I watched him prod the female cadaver with a fearsome-looking scalpel. What about the weapons? The Zweihander and the Gladius? Mighty fine blades, both of them, he said.
Would have been a real good scrap if they'd gotten that far. They got him locked upstairs in the armory.
Lenny, I need to know. If it's possible for immortals to die this way, why has it never happened before? Lenny shook his head.
Beats me. Maybe it has. Did you think of that? Maybe the great Duncan MacLeod just hasn't heard about it.
No, that's not it. We'd have all heard about it. On TV, it looked like they were about to start fighting when...
I saw it, Duncan. The whole station house saw it. Nothing happens in Seacover without everyone seeing it. Not these days. Kaboom!
Exactly. I winced at the old man's honesty. It's like the fighting triggered it. Lenny grunted. What's with the DNA? Lenny peered through his dirty black-rimmed spectacles at me.
That's the thing, young Duncan. The guys in the white coats, they've been down here again and again, prodding and poking and taking tissue samples. Always the same. The same result. Nada.
What do you mean, nada? I asked. Even immortals have DNA. He shook his head.
Scrambled, they reckon. Like nothing they've ever encountered.
That can't be.
My family's been dealing with your kind for a long time, Duncan. Lots that can't be just is, if you take my meaning.
No DNA, no evidence, nothing.
Not nothing. Something.
Well, what? Without a word, Lenny went to a nearby desk and picked up a plastic box, which he held out toward me. Gingerly, I picked up a polythene bag marked evidence. I held it up to the fluorescent light and examined the blackened contents. What is it? I asked.
The only other things to survive the fire. That one, that's a cufflink, I think. Pricey, too. Can you make out the stone?
I turned the bag over. It seemed to be full of nothing but ash, so I shook it. There was something there glistening amidst the soot. A diamond.
Take a look at the other bag, said Lenny.
I pulled another evidence bag out of the box. The contents of this were easier to see. It contained a blackened chain culminating in another diamond. A necklace.
What do you notice?
They look expensive.
Expensive, yeah! They look flawless.
I looked more closely. Lenny was right. Even in the harsh fluorescent light of the morgue, it was possible to see.
Flawless diamonds gotta be hard to lay your hands on,
Lenny pointed out.
Even for an immortal.
The best part of a week passed. The days continued to blister with heat. During the nights, the sky burst with torrential rain, a typical Seacover summer. By now, Antoine and Maria were evidently exchanging more than pensive smiles. She was staying at his apartment, for her protection, of course. I was fine with that. I didn't ask the nature of their arrangement, although I could guess. My mind was elsewhere, preoccupied with finding out where those diamonds came from. Each day, Laura made phone calls on my behalf. Each day, she drew a blank. The horizon shimmered in heat haze. I passed elderly joggers, parents with young children devouring ice creams, street performers, couples holding hands, a hot dog stand. The park was brimming with life. As I rounded the corner, the familiar gigantic construction hoved into view above the tall trees. The legendary Seacover roller coaster, its garish 70-year-old paintwork peeling beneath the hot sun. I stared up at the gargantuan roller coaster. Children milled around me, shouting, laughing, devouring candy floss. People clambered enthusiastically aboard the roller coaster train. Straining, I was able to spot a familiar couple being locked into one of the carriages. Antoine and Maria. I couldn't resist a sardonic smile when Anton, the eternal kid, had arranged to meet me here, of all places, slap in the middle of the Seacover Fun Fair. The train started to make its way sedately skyward, the occupants chattering excitedly to one another. And then it plunged down the other side, and the passengers screamed for all they're worth. I watched Antoine and Maria laughing and shrieking alongside everyone else. Eventually, the ride came to a halt, and I saw them disembark. They were still laughing, gazing at each other, holding hands. I stood and watched them kiss, tenderly, against the backdrop of the roller coaster like something out of an old movie. Young lovers. Then they saw me. I steeled myself. With my mind on other things, I'd forgotten I'd be spending this encounter as the proverbial gooseberry. They disengaged from one another and turned toward me. In seemingly direct relation to the intensity of her blossoming relationship with Antoine, my interactions with Maria had become, if anything, even frostier. As a consequence, I asked questions only when it seemed appropriate. Antoine, meanwhile, lapsed into ruminative silence. Sulking, perhaps. Who knew? He hid his eyes behind shades and lit a cigarette. The three of us parted to let a horse and trap pass by. We watched the honeymooning couple vanish into their idyllic future. We carried on, back the way I'd come, pausing to watch street performers. There was a juggler, a woman on a unicycle, and a mime artist. A guy had sprayed himself from top to toe in gold paint and was pretending to be a statue, but his sweat was making the paint run. We sat down by a nearby duck pond. "Tell me more about Belog," I asked.
He wasn't a cruel man. Not at first. Compared to my dead husband, he was compassionate, caring. But the longer it went on,
The operations.
he said I could save myself, redeem myself in the eyes of God. He said the pain was worth it.
Because it would save his daughter. I was suddenly aware, peripherally, of something odd. Something off kilter. Not that familiar tingle that told me that immortals were near. Something different. Call it intuition. I looked at Antoine, but he was staring into the distance, his emotions hidden by the sunglasses.
Frederick thought that if he could find the root of my immortality, that he could replicate it. He was so certain.
How many times did he operate on you? I asked as delicately as I could. She had no time to answer. I turned to see the gold-living statue lunging towards us, wielding a gigantic saber which flashed in the hot sun. I grabbed Maria and pushed her to one side as Antoine barreled into the statue, attempting to grab his blade arm. There had been no warning. Whoever this guy was, he was mortal. I pivoted on the spot, in time to see the screaming crowd of onlookers separate to allow three saber-wielding figures through: the unicyclist, the juggler, and the mime artist. The lead figure sliced through the air with his blade, forcing me to let go of Maria. I backed away, unable to prevent the other two figures from dragging her off into the crowd. Antoine grappled with the first attacker. "What do we do, Duncan?" shouted Antoine. "Improvise!" I ducked the lunge from my opponent. There was a sudden crash behind me, and I saw Antoine flipping his assailant over his shoulder and into the middle of the coconut shaft. The distraction was enough for me to grab the hot dog stand and send it careering into my opponent. As Antoine and myself headed after Maria, we could hear his angry shout in the distance. Maria was struggling in the arms of one of the assailants, but they were a good way ahead of us. "Duncan!" Antoine yelled. We're never going to catch him like this." "There!" I shouted, pointing. We'd reached the horse and trap that had passed by earlier on. We clambered aboard, and the terrified man and woman in the back didn't take much persuading that this was their stop. The driver was more reluctant, so I was forced to tip him off the seat. I took his place and cracked the reins with a tremendous cry of, "Giddy up!" Suddenly the pony and trap were flying through park. I was aware that there was a great big cheesy grin on my face, and I realized that this was like old times. For a split second I could see Connor's grinning face. We bore down on the figures as they headed for the park exit. I was able to pull just ahead of them, barring their escape. I leapt down and advanced on them. "You don't know what you're doing," shouted one of the men, rattling his saber. I watched Anton come up behind him and ferociously wrenched the blade from his hand. Anton swung the saber in the air, and for a split second I thought he was so blinded with fury that he would decapitate the stranger as though he was an immortal. Thankfully, the madness passed. Realization of what he'd been about to do flickered across Antoine's face, and he threw the saber to one side. This was the opportunity the man needed. In an instant, he was up and running. Antoine went to throw himself after him, but a sharp kick to the head sent my friend sprawling, and his assailant was away, joining his associate who had already fled. Maria, dazed but otherwise unhurt, ran to Antoine's side, helping him up, and for a minute we stood there in silence, taking in what had happened. Then I noticed in his hand was a pair of silver handcuffs, which Antoine had snatched from his attacker.
They're called the Order of Lachesis.
Maria was huddled on a chair in the corner of Antoine's apartment. Antoine had draped a blanket over her shoulders. I watched as he handed her a cup of cocoa. She smiled weakly. I was staring out of the window, watching Seacouver swelter in the heat. The glass was grimy in need of cleaning. What do they want, Maria?
I told you when we met, Duncan. They want to kill me.
To act out Belloc's revenge.
Yes. Belloc was a wealthy man with massive influence. The vow the original order took all those years ago has been passed from generation to generation.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's quite a grudge, but kill you? I'm not so sure. Why were they carrying these? I held aloft the silver handcuffs, and out of the corner of my eye, I watched Maria wince. I think if they wanted to kill you, they would have done. It's MacLeod. Hey, Lauren. Cool. As I scribbled on a notepad, I watched Antoine grasp Maria's hand reassuringly. She smiled, uncertainly. I have to go, I said. I saw Maria staring at me as I hung the silver handcuffs from her coat hook. I pulled on my leather jacket. You guys better stay put. Don't answer the door. I wrenched open the heavy door of the shop and walked across a pressure mat. I was immediately aware of multiple CCTV cameras swiveling toward me. Hello? There was no response, but I knew that someone was there. I was aware, too, that the security cameras were following my progress. As I walked, I passed cabinet after cabinet of extraordinary jewels, diamonds, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, pearls, which glistened and twinkled in the soft artificial light. You know, someone should actually make a study of the careers immortals finish up in. Both myself and my cousin Connor ended up in the antiques trade, so I guess you might call that the MacLeod family business. But I can think of numerous other immortals who tried to play it straight by going into archaeology or running museums. I guess it's no surprise we should all end up dealing in old things. I stopped in front of a huge cabinet displaying a particularly impressive diamond and bent to look. In the reflection of the cabinet, I saw something metallic flash. I heard breathing and slowly turned around. I'd heard of the woman who ran the place. If anything, the descriptions didn't do her justice. Her name was Priya Pather, a towering woman of Indian descent, beautiful, statuesque. She wielded a formidable-looking sword in the offensive position, a khanda, as used by the Rajput kings. And from the imperfections on the blade, I could see that this particular khanda had been well used. "You are Duncan MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod," she said. I nodded. She lowered the sword. "I have been expecting you." We walked through into an antechamber. I know little about jewels, but the ones she had on display were remarkable. She wore a purple stone around her neck, which I correctly identified as an amethyst, but many of the other stones remained a mystery to me. Priya named them each as we passed: Andalusite, Axonite, Cassiterite, Clinohumite, Bixbite. To me, all I knew was each one of them sparkled. "Why gems?" I found myself asking. She looked surprised at this. "Because they are beautiful and they last forever," she said. "You're right." I started choosing my moment. "In fact, I reckon they probably survive anything, even intense heat." Priya sighed and turned to face me. "Why are you here, Mr. MacLeod?" "I think you know," I replied. "I'm guessing you, like the majority of Seacouver, watched that little duel on the news the other night. You know, it's the strangest thing. Nothing survived. No clothing, no fingernails, teeth, nothing. The police can't even do a DNA trace. All they have are 2 pieces of jewelry, her necklace and his cufflinks, each studded with a diamond. And the really weird thing is, those diamonds, they were expensive. Flawless. Miss Pather, can you tell me where those individuals could have acquired such flawless diamonds?" She arched an eyebrow. "I don't play games, Mr. MacLeod," Priya said. "Not those kinds of games at any rate." I noticed her brush the hilt of her khanda with her long fingers. "If you didn't know who cut those stones, you wouldn't be here." "But who commissioned them, Miss Pather?" "I looked it up after I spoke with your assistant," she told me. "The commission was anonymous." She viewed my expression of disappointment with mild amusement. "But," Priya added,